Howdy, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I, uh, I'm trying to play Project Zomboid, but I want to try to get into Rimworld a little bit. And to start with, I was wanting to show a pre-existing world that I've been working on or playing for a while. Let's see if I can get it here. I have all sorts of different names for my saves. Just load up the last one. I jumped into this game after watching uh, Drunk on Life play it for a while. He has some pretty good streams, so if you're ever into gaming and stuff, you might want to check his streams out. But after watching him play it, I really liked the idea of some of the stuff that I saw, so I got into it. Um, and it, I mean, the cons outweigh the pros with this game because, in my opinion, at least, I come from a web development, web app background, or who, well, let me rephrase this. I went to school for IT, and at the time I specialized, or I declared a specialization of basically website design. At work and during in my career job, I kind of like a UI specialist for web apps and websites. So it's hard for me to get out of that mindset whenever I think about different applications and things like that. And so whenever I play this game, I see all sorts of things that kind of drive me nuts. Like, I can't really think of an example off the top of my head, but there's times sometimes when you're trying to figure out ways to organize your colonists, especially where things like clothing or work assignments and schedules and things like that are concerned, you kind of have to click into different areas to achieve basically the end result that you're kind of hoping for. And it really gets annoying, in my opinion, because you try to go through the game, especially when you're new, you try to go through figuring out where you go for what thing, especially when you're looking over here and you see, you know, these colonists being idle or the animal filth and stuff like that. You're sitting there going through the stuff in your mind, trying to figure out how to fix it all. And, and the really challenging thing about this game is that depending on what kind of AI, uh, artificial intelligence you play with, it can just keep throwing stuff out at you simultaneously without you having much of a chance of learning where the things are. So it helps to kind of watch others play the game for a while before you actually jump in, because you really learn a lot about where all of the menus are for whatever kinds of operations you're trying to achieve. But anyway, this is my my colony, and I'll give you kind of a lay of the land here with the world before I show you everything. So this is where I am. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but we're basically kind of right on the edge and on the coast of this mountainous area. The big wigs in my world are these guys, the White Imperium, because from what I understand, if I'm not mistaken, people that generate worlds have different names. It's in other words, I guess the White Imperium might be a different name in a different player's game. But this is where I am. Started off here. I haven't really moved around any. I mean, occasionally I might do something where I'll like check out like a ancient complex like this if it's not too far away, because I hate traveling in this game, and that's one thing that irks me about this game is like you'll set up a colony somewhere and you'll see all of these different places miles and miles away, and I haven't really figured out an easy way yet on how to travel long distances. I mean, I know that you have the whole pod stuff, and you can obviously go by foot with the yaks or whatever other uh, animals and stuff you have in your stock. But in doing something like that, you really expose the opportunity to be exploited by either opposing factions or, you know, some sort of catastrophe happening at your base while some of your other people are gone. So I usually don't take the risk if it means like traveling more than 2 or 3 days. To me, it's just too much of a risk, and there's been too many times when I've been really burnt bad trying that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's where I am, and if I'm trying to remember exactly, so right now I'm allies basically with the big guys, this Imperium group. Um, I guess I'm not really an ally with these people, but I'm on really good terms with them. But everyone else, besides this group, I guess, well, I guess I'm an ally with them too. But everyone else, I'm always having run ins with. And it really kind of bugs me because I'd like to be a good guy for everyone, but you know how that goes. So, anyway, there's the lay of the land. Now, I chose this place because I thought it wouldn't be a super extreme type of environment to deal with. Because when I first started, I was dealing with a lot of mountainous area and stuff like that. And as you can see, I've done a lot of mining and everything. And I've managed to get just about all of the minerals and steel and everything else that this place has had, with the exception of all of the remaining stone. And I can't stand dealing with all the stone and stuff because I don't really feel a need to build a lot of stuff with that kind of material because I'm always after things like, I'll show you what I've done with my defenses here. Like with steel and components in this game, to be quite honest, are a bitch because every time you want to do something of any kind of uh, significance, 9 times out of 10, it's always going to require a component. Sometimes the advanced components are a necessity too for more complex kinds of machinery and stuff, I guess. But for me, it's always been about getting a good supply of components because as you can see, I've tried to deck the hell out of my base with adequate defenses, like these auto turrets and these uranium slug turrets. I mean, I have yet to see really any opposing force even come close to my base because of these things. And they've really been beneficial for me to be able to kind of maintain some sort of stability with everything. But besides that, though, you obviously have power sources, um, wind generators, you know, and so all of those things always require components, or at least for me, they always have. Um, Besides mining, or at least, you know, breaking into things like these mountains and stuff, I make pretty significant use on the ground penetrating radar because it's with that combined with my main guy here. By the way, the three founders of this place are these three right here. But this guy right here is my main guy, Big Red, and he's the guy I've always used to use ground penetrating scans and to keep finding me things like uh, this plasteel stuff, deposit, and steel mostly. That's the biggest thing I'm always after is steel, but plasteel comes into play sometimes, and especially uranium for those turrets. But usually, whenever I find those, I try to grab at least one person to throw down a one of those. I can't remember the name of it. Deep drill. And I don't know if there's a cap on that per map grid that you build on, but usually, as long as I keep throwing a guy at that scanner, he keeps apparently finding those deposits, and I'm hoping and praying that he continues to do so because if he doesn't, then that means basically at some point I'm going to be screwed because obviously, as you can see, I've just about mined everything else out, and as long as we keep finding deposits, we should be able to sustain everything. But here's, you know, one defense, two defense, and the biggest reason that I started doing that, as crazy as this, is because I got into the routine of having to summon those things. I can't remember what they're called, but the things that you need in order to build these things right here. Because at one point not long ago, I had a severe issue of pollution, and it got so bad to the point to where I was resorting to using these pods, to these transport pods, to generate these stupid or to take away these toxic waste packs. And what I would normally do is I would load those things up into those pods and just shoot them off. And that worked for a while until the White Imperium started bitching and complaining about it. and it got to a point where I was kind of running the risk of having them come out and trying to throttle me. So after doing some research, I realized that these things could be built. And the problem with my situation at first was that I didn't have enough of those. And in order to get these things, you've got to summon these, man, I can't remember what they're called. Basically, like a certain special type of mech that whenever you kill them, you get a certain type of chip or something like that that you need to build these things. And why you can't build those stupid chips in like a fabrication table or something is beyond me. But in any event, you do that to get those chips. Well, during the first one or two run-ins with those parties of those special mechs, I was usually kind of getting my ass handed to me, and it got to a point where I had to keep saving and reloading until I lucked out, because 9 times out of 10, what would happen is that they would drop, and I know that the AI is probably behind this, but they would like drop like right here, where they would maximize the amount of destruction that they would uh, unleash on my entire base. Because if they're like right here, that would be basically like one of the weak points of my base right now. Because obviously these things, I mean, excuse me, these things can reach pretty far. These things though, they're a little, they don't have that range, and so by dropping it here, the AI knows that it would be the biggest amount of challenge for the player, I guess, or at least that's what I'm kind of assuming. But I learned though that if I kept reloading the game before the drop, I could sometimes get them to drop either over here or over here, and usually they wouldn't even come close. And by the way, over here too is kind of like on my little minefield. I've got tons of these set up all over the place, and those would help too. But anyway, that's the reason that I started building these things the way that I did. It's because I kept needing those stupid chips to build these things until I had enough where I could finally get ahead of all of this pollution crap. That way I wouldn't have to keep loading those things up into these pods and shooting them out and then pissing the White Imperium off. But what I'm going to do at some point is start a new colony. Once I kind of get sick and tired of this colony, I'll start a new one. And one thing I've done a lot of thinking about is how I'm going to do that. Because one thing I've kind of thought I would like to try is making kind of like a circular base where, I don't know, I would basically kind of start in the center and essentially do this kind of base defense, except in kind of like a circular pattern. You see what I'm saying? Where the center areas would be, like the living quarters and all that kind of stuff, whereby the outer perimeter would be surrounded by these kinds of base defenses. And I guess the idea behind that would be that it would be impossible I guess any vectors of attack by any opposing opposition, they would all have equal amounts of coverage by the base defenses. So I don't know if I'm going to ever get to that point or not, but I was thinking I might try it one day. There's been a couple times when I've been offered a base buyout or a colony buyout by, who was it? I think it was these guys that offered a couple times. But I've never really been super serious about doing something like that, because I kind of like just, playing the game. But one thing I would really love to see the developers do at some point, like you see how all of these grids essentially represent the space in which you wind up building your base. What I would like to do is, or what I would hope to see one day, is developers incorporate some sort of addition or enhancement or feature or a configuration option where you could adjust the size of these grids to encompass a bigger spot that you can build your base on. That way you can have more real estate to work within, because you're kind of limited to these boundaries. And one thing that really irks me about this game is that when you get to a certain distance, like if I can, I mean, I know you probably understand what I'm getting at here, but like over here in this distance, or where is it? I've tried to build stuff like right past this field line. You're not allowed to build anything. and you can't like just easily send your guys over to the next square to add on to your base or something like that. Unless there's like maybe, I don't know, a module or something out there that you can do that with. But everything that you build with, I mean, you're just kind of stuck on this one grid plot, and you can't use the these moisture pumps to expand in deep ocean. They'll be able to eventually dry up all of this shallow water, but whenever it comes to the deep ocean, you're just kind of screwed. And again, unless there's modules or something out there that change that or enable some sort of way to get around that, at least as far as core is concerned, you can't. There's not really anything that I'm aware of, at least, that you can use to take advantage of this space. So I mean, again, you've got like docks or whatever, or bridges, I guess is what Rimworld refers to it as. You can make bridges on the shallow water, but whenever it comes to the deep ocean stuff, you're kind of screwed. You can't even build boats unless I'm missing something. So I mean, in a way, I kind of screwed myself over by building on the shoreline like this, I guess. But I mean, that's again something that you wouldn't. I mean, I just don't understand the logical rationale there. I mean, if you've got a civilization, excuse me, my mouth is kind of dry here, but if you've got a civilization or a people that are capable of doing things like building solar panels, for crying out loud, or these geothermal generators, or freaking ground penetrating scanners, you would think that they would at least have enough technological proficiency to be able to make a friggin' boat or something that could help them build outward into the deep ocean. But I understand that I'm probably overthinking things or whatever, and in a realistic kind of scenario, they'd be able to do that. But in this game, for whatever reasons, they just didn't have that incorporated into it. But that's another thing that kind of irks me about this type of stuff. And again, that's my programmer analyst mindset, getting anal about things. But I mean, there's little quirks like that about this game that really drive you off the wall sometimes if you sit there and kind of stew over it. And there's the occasional colonist that will do things like go on food eating binges or have little tantrums where they will walk around and start punching things like a heater or walls or whatever else, and you've got to. There's been times when they would do that, I would have one of my guys literally jail them up for a day or two in my little dungeon that I have down here, just to get them to calm down. But when you do that though, and when you release them back into the colony, it takes a few days for them to get past their little animosity of doing that to them. So they'll kind of be a little pouty and stuff, and what you'll sometimes see is that in the needs, they'll have down here some sort of needs penalty indicating that they were jailed or something like that, which increases the likelihood that they'll have some other kind of tantrum or some stuff like that. So I mean, there's a lot of dynamics with this game in terms of making sure that your colonists aren't pissed off or depressed or anything that kind of plays into whether or not you can get a kind of a big base like this going. Another thing too that I've struggled with in the beginning is storage. Storage in this game is one hell of a thing to kind of get your head wrapped around, because there's ways that you can use things like these shelves to store specific items. This place up here, for the most part, is my food stores. Now, you'll see in some of this that it's got a mixture of things too, and I just haven't really organized some of that stuff yet. But it's mostly meant for food, because this is kind of like a refrigerated cooler. And most of these places are. I usually have some sort of cooling system with most of the stuff, or storage places. That way, if something ever comes up and I need more food store space or something, I can always move things around. But food, for the most part, is in here with some other stuff. Food here. Here, in this 50% half of this place, are weapons. And over here is armor. Yeah, basically armor. And up here are various textiles, because as you saw, I've got a hell of a ton of animals, and whenever I wind up butchering any of them, it obviously generates, leathers and things like that. And it got to a point where I was beginning to really struggle with finding places for those materials. And so I have one major place right here, one right here, and I believe there's another one, yeah, right here, and also right here that I use to store all of that stuff because with my place I have tons of animals, so that so I generate a lot of leather and skins and stuff that have to be used for that. And one way I usually try to deal with the excess of that kind of material is with the comms console, because every once in a while I'll get some sort of planetary uh, orbiting bulk goods trader. And when I do, and assuming that the trader is open to trading things like those materials, that's usually when I load up on cash, because I have a hell of a lot of that type of stuff that I can usually offload. And whenever I do, as a rule of thumb, at least in my experience, I guess every player will be different in this capacity, but with my experience, I always try to prioritize trading for components first. I load up as much as possible on every single component every trader always has first, because every single time I build anything around here, whether it be weapons or some sort of armor or, you know, building stuff, I always need components, and that's always the first thing that I wind up running out on. Despite the fact that I have like multiple mechs building that stuff um, through way of zones, because that's another thing that I try to make extensive use of. Is I'll give you a lay of the land on that here. Let me see here. I have multiple kinds of zones for my mechs. As far as those that can actually build stuff like weapons or components, those would be the fabricors. And I've made a zone that I refer to as smithing operations, which essentially encompasses all of the fabrication benches, and I assign those fabricors to the smithing operations zone. That way they don't wander off and start screwing around with other things. And whenever I make those zones, I'm always sure to include the charging stations. That way whenever they get done working for the day or whenever it is that they run out of juice, the zone allows them to travel to the charging station and then recharge. Because that's something else that catches a lot of players with this game, is they'll have like a worker or some of those mechs do specific tasks, but they forget to do things like include in their work zones beds or the kitchen. Whenever they wind up doing the stuff, they'll be walking around like starving to death and stuff like that, which is really, when you're new to the game, that really gets frustrating, because you're sitting there wondering, what in the hell are you doing walking around bitching and complaining about, needing food, when you're right by the kitchen. And if you go and look at the zone that you've assigned them or some sort of thing like that, you'll realize that it's because they're constrained from entering into the kitchen because of whatever it is that you've assigned them. But that's kind of like a catch that I think could be improved with a better UI system, because I don't know. That's just kind of me. Then again, I think maybe another way to deal with that would be with a better type of AI system too. Like if you've got a worker that's working on something, like let's say they're making guns or whatever it is that they're doing up here, and they begin to get hungry, you would think that it would be common sense then that your colonists should walk through here, through this little power room, and down into the freezer slash cooler area to maybe get some sort of pre-made dinner, and just go over there, eat it real quick, and then go back to work. But this game it's weird, because it kind of it changes from being a programmatic game to sometimes doing those kinds of basic common sense things. It's like it cherry picks how things have been developed in this game, and I'm sure it's just probably a mixture of accidents and general game development that's still kind of in progress with all of this stuff. So it's always a work in progress, but like I said earlier, the game's cons are outweighed by the game's pros, because when you're not messing around with all of that stupid stuff, this game is really fun. It is super fun, because there there's nothing more fulfilling than getting some sort of indication about some sort of opposition faction beginning to make a raid, and then seeing all of these guns just completely open up a can of whoop-ass on them, and those guys not even having a chance to even come as close as these sandbags. Or whenever, like for example, you're growing your crops, if you've been struggling with food and you finally see the crops pop up to the extent that they're able to be harvested, and then seeing all of the hungry colonists be satisfied and stuff. I mean, it's really fun to watch that stuff. In a way, it's almost like a Sim City kind of game where you're making all of these things, and you go through the trials and tribulations of things like bankruptcy or natural catastrophes and stuff, and when you surpass all of those challenges and things and you see everything just kind of fall into place, it really adds to the fun of it. So I'm not really sure how many colonists I have. How many is it? 33, I guess. So I've got 33 colonists. I have maybe, how many mechs do I have? I don't know. Maybe 20 something, maybe? I don't know. I haven't counted them. But out of these colonists, I think, who is it? I think it might be this guy, this chick, this guy, and I think, yeah, this person. I think those are my 4 people that can control the mechs. And it took me a long time to get to this point. I had to make all sorts of different bandwidth expanders, or whatever you call those things, band nodes, to increase the bandwidth, because when you first start out with these mechs and you have colonists that can control them, I think it's like maybe 4 slots that you can control mechs through, and these band nodes expand that bandwidth. Um, as far as weaponry is concerned, I've really fallen in love with these charge rifles. I've done some research on that, and I guess the rule of thumb is that assault rifles are the all-around best weapon to use. I don't like assault rifles though. I prefer the charge rifles. I just think that the damage combined with the risk you take with the shorter range, as opposed to things like the assault rifles, kind of makes everything more outweighed in terms of the cons and stuff. And plus too, I mean, with my base, as you can see, I've got plenty of defenses. So by the time any kind of threat comes even remotely close enough harming my colonists, I mean, all it takes is like maybe 1 or 2 shots anyway with one of those charge rifles. When I first started out, though, I was starting off with trying to produce for my colonists those bolt action rifles, because they had a pretty good amount of range combined with damage. And through time, it changed from going from that to those shotguns, those chain shotguns. I used those for a while until I was able to start making some of those assault rifles. But from the assault rifles, then I can't remember how it happened. I think I killed someone that had a charge rifle at one point. I equipped it to someone, and after seeing how awesome they were, I began to just kind of pivot towards the charge rifles as the uh, standard rifle of all of my colonists. As far as armor is concerned, whenever the shit really hits the fan, I always equip them with the marine armor. Otherwise, I just leave it off of them, because I think there's something embedded into the logic of the colonists where they feel better whenever they're not wearing the bulky armor and stuff. So I don't make them wear it unless there's some sort of actual armed conflict. But before I got to the marine armor, I was using things like flak jackets and stuff. So there's kind of like a segue between that and everything else. Now, as far as like explosive devices are concerned, um, I used launchers at one point. I've never used one of those. What do they call them? The Doomsday guns or whatever. I've never used those because I've been kind of afraid to use them. I don't know how destructive they actually are. But the charge rifles, those things seem to be my standard. Trying to think if there's something else I was gonna say. Oh, whenever I summon mechs, I try to have at least 1 or 2 people armed with these EMP grenades, because those things seem to stun them long enough to let the other to let my shock trooper guys lay into the main front with the charge rifles. That's always been a pretty awesome strategy from everything I've seen. I always try to accept any kind of offered job uh, if it comes with one of these things, these infinite chem reactors, because those things generate the chem fuel, and obviously the chem fuel can be used for all sorts of stuff, including making the explosives for these mines, or I guess IEDs. Power is always a big thing in this game, from what I've discovered, and I've tried to mix up my portfolio of power supply sources between things that continuously generate power, like the wind turbines, combined with solar panels that kind of act as the bulk generator whenever the sun's out. These things, I love geothermal because they always work regardless of whether or not there's storms or anything else going on outside. The one exception being obviously the solar flares, which are a pain in the ass sometimes to deal with. But regardless of whatever power supply I'm using, I try to mix it up. That way, it's a very diverse set of sources, maximizing the chance that there's always at least one power source working. And I try to max out on the batteries. That way, whenever things get broken or shot at or whatever, I'll always have these to kind of, rely on. Now, I've heard that there's ways to use batteries despite the potential for solar flares, and I tried to do it using a power switch by like turning the power switch off whenever everything is charged up all the way, and then whenever a solar flare hits, turning it on. I haven't found that that works though, and I think I misread the article or tutorial or whatever it was that I was depending on to come up with this idea, because in my mind there should be a way to sustain some form of power despite a solar flare happening, but so far from everything I've discovered there isn't, unless there's like a module or something out there that could change that. One thing I've learned in this game is that it's best to try to make everything as modular as possible whenever dealing with colonists, and this is exemplified by the way I've tried to structure my basically the barracks, because as you can see, there's a vent in each room, a cooler, and a heater, as well as obviously the bed and minor furnishings. Now, one thing that they do sometimes complain about is that, especially if you've got somebody with the jealousy character trait, somebody will complain about someone else's room not being that great, or else somebody who owns the room will complain about it not being very decorative or something like that. And whenever that happens, I try to make some sort of stupid little art type thing to install in there. That way, it kind of reduces that penalty. And that so far has been a pretty beneficial tactic that I've used in all of this. I don't know why all these stupid things are in here. I'm gonna have to fix that. Wonder if that might be some sort of roof that collapsed. I just now saw that. But anyway, that helps. Um, Clothing in this game is a major issue too, and it took me a long time to get to a point to where it wasn't as much of a hindrance. What I've discovered is that for every colonist, there's basically I'll show it here. There's basically a clothing template that you can essentially assign them. And from what I've come to understand is that, if I can bring it up here, I want to make sure I don't screw something up here. For this worker template as an example, I make it to where they absolutely have to have something either at 50% or better hit points. Now, I've tried to mess around with quality as well. It's been kind of mixed results, but nothing has worked for me as well as just simply making sure that they always equip themselves with a 50% or higher hit point article of clothing. And as long as you have that, usually they never complain about tattered apparel. Because it's been my experience that whenever you have colonists complaining about tattered apparel, that is usually whenever you start snowballing a bunch of problems, because one thing leads to another. Their tattered apparel turns into some sort of, mood issue, and then suddenly they're quarreling with other colonists, getting into fights and everything, and it's just a cacophony of problems. But if you stay ahead of that clothing apparel situation and assign some sort of working template, that usually kind of staves that off really well. And with me, as you can see, I mean, as long as I've got a fabric core constantly making new articles of clothing of a certain particular type of quality, or I think I've got like one guy. I think it might actually be him too, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, smithing. This guy, he's really awesome at uh, crafting. He's a 20 on craft. So as long as I keep him working in the smithing operations, particularly with the clothing stuff. Where is my clothing stuff? Right there. Um, he'll keep at keeping our articles of clothing stocked, and I think over here is where I keep them all at. And what I've found is that usually your colonists will go out there and swap out clothes whenever it reaches a certain threshold that goes below the 50 hit point threshold, and that simply takes care of that clothing issue. So, and as far as, you know, taming animals and stuff, I've got a few rhinos here, and one thing that I've discovered that kind of helps me personally is that whenever I want, so you can see from here that managing these animals would be a major pain in the ass. But one thing that I've found to help me with that is that I'll try to keep at least one male and one female of every species named a certain way. And the way I do that is with triple dashes, and then I just name it Mr. or Mrs. and then the species of animal that it is. And this makes it to where I don't have to worry about accidentally selling the animals into, like, how should I word this? It makes it sustainable and replenishable this way, because all of the others are basically expendable. You know, if I was to have a bulk trader who needed some animals and stuff, I wouldn't hesitate at all at selling all of these, as long as I have a Mr. and Mrs. Alpaca somewhere in all of this. Now, I don't know if I've got that right now in this, the way I've got things organized, because I don't really prioritize hanging on to alpacas, but the bisons I do, because the bisons seem to have really, their value seems to be better on average whenever it comes to selling their fur and stuff. And they all obviously they can be eaten, and they can also be used whenever you're going on travels and stuff. They can be used as a beast of burden. So I always try to make sure that I've got a Mr. and Mrs. of those, because then for whatever ones I sell, I can always I can always be insured to replenish them at some point. But I mean, and right now it's hit and miss, because obviously your animals grow old and sometimes they die and stuff, and so sometimes you have to rename them or make sure that you've got your mom and dad replenished. But that's basically the rule of thumb that I always try to use with managing all of these things. And I try to prioritize hanging on to horses and yaks, because the horses and yaks are usually, from what I understand, the best types of species of animals to use whenever you're doing things like either going on raids or trips or whatever. Let's see, is there anything else here that's worth talking about? Again, this is as you obviously see, it's a pre-existing colony that I think I've been playing with this colony now for maybe about 2 months, 2.5, somewhere around there. Oh, crematoriums. Those things come into play, and they're actually something that you should take seriously at some point. Because one thing that colonists don't like is seeing, like, dead animals laying around and stuff like that. And especially if you're someone like me who has a lot of animals, sooner or later you're going to wind up having experiences where some of those animals die off for whatever reasons. And so you want to try to have a way to kind of manage those manage the disposal of those carcasses. And when that comes into play, the first thing you're going to want to do is make one of these kinds of things, a dumping stockpile zone, and that works for a while until you get to a certain size where that space begins to run out. So then at that point, you either need to resize stuff, which causes problems for other building projects that you want to have or deal with, or it creates problems where it takes a long time to haul things back and forth. And all of that's kind of something that you can deal with by making these crematoriums. And that's basically what I've tried to do with these. I've set these to basically be used for disposing things like corpses and dead animals and things like that. And you can configure them in such a way to where I think, what is it? I think let me look at the details here. I think there's a way to where you can configure these to dispose of specific kinds of corpses. Well, obviously like the human and or the animal corpses, but I mean in terms of like whether or not you want to hang on to the fresh ones or dispose of the rotten ones, as you can see here. And I guess you can use the hit point type approach too. Is there anything else though I was wanting to talk about? I mean, I guess for the most part that's the gist of it. I mean, obviously there's a lot that goes into all of this. It took me a while to get to this point. I had to work a lot with power sources, had to do a lot with research. Research in this game is a big deal if you're wanting to progress to a point where you have things like your mechs and your advanced type of base defenses. But for me, the biggest pain in the ass in this game was dealing with the pollution. And once I got past that, everything else was cake. And the reason that was a big deal is because I had to summon those apocrycrons or whatever it is that they are, the special types of mechs that drop the certain kinds of chipsets that you need in order to build these things. But once I got ahead of that stuff, everything kind of fell into place and I began to finally have some level of stability. So anyway, man, I hope you enjoyed looking at my base, kind of like a base tour. I'm probably going to make some more videos of this particular colony. I would have done it back in the beginning, but back then I wasn't really streaming or not streaming, but uploading video content. But now that I am, I'm gonna probably start making some videos of my journey and all of this. One of these days, though, I'll probably redo a colony, start from scratch, and make that kind of like a new story to cover. But until then, it's gonna be this colony for a while. And I don't really know what my overall end game is for this colony. I've been telling myself that it'd be kind of cool to kind of conquer the entire world. I don't honestly see how I could ever do something like that, though. I mean, just look at all this. It's insane how much space and stuff you would have to cover in order to accomplish something like that. But I've seen videos on YouTube of people supposedly doing stuff like that, so I don't know if I'm ever going to try to do something like that or not. But one thing I just really wish this game had was actual ships. Like you could build a ship or something and then just, fly around, because then it would make things like that a little more realistic. I know that shuttles exist in this game, but from what I've seen so far, you can't research and build your own shuttles unless you have some mod or something. I mean, everything with this game seems to revolve around installing mods in order to get things that you would think would otherwise be somewhat common sense or expected. So anyway, I think I'm going to go ahead and end this video at this point, though. I just basically wanted to show you my base, let you check it out, see what you think. And yeah, here's my throne room. Obviously, once you reach a certain point with stuff in this game, you can like ascend into some sort of knighthood, which is what this guy is. He's a knight, or at least he was, unless he's been demoted for pissing someone off. But that guy is supposedly a knight, and this is his throne. And so whenever there's certain kinds of ceremonies and stuff that happen, sometimes they'll all come in here and do things like that. So, but I've made a lot of progress in this game. It's a fun game. If you haven't played it, I highly encourage you to. I don't think you'll regret it. So, Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and there's more to come.